Right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity finally to present the results of the SOURCE trial, the primary efficacy analysis results of a study comparing adjuvant sorafenib for 1 or 3 years with placebo. These are my disclosures. There are two of particular relevance. One is that Bayer provided generous support for this MRC study, and the second is that I'm currently employed by AstraZeneca, which becomes relevant at the end of the talk. Today I'm going to be presenting the trial design and outcome measures, baseline characteristics, the primary analysis results, treatment compliance and adverse events. We have already published data from these studies. So Martin Stockler and Prunella Blindman have led data studies looking at patient and clinician preferences, and we've also published on genomic risk from patients included in this study. We have completed, but I'm only going to give you the very top-line data for pre-planned, pre-powered analyses for benefit in high-risk patients versus all patients and in clear cell patients. There are other planned analyses which I will not be speaking about today: metastasis-free survival, RCC-specific survival, dose intensity, which is an issue, and corroboration of the Leibovitz score. This is the trial design. This is a study for patients with high and intermediate risk of relapse, having had a resected renal cell carcinoma. This is for patients with Leibovitz scores of 3 to 11. 1,711 such patients were randomized between July 2007 and April 2013 in the ratio of 2 to 3 to 3, 2 for placebo for 3 years, 3 for 1 year of sorafenib followed by 2 years of placebo, and 3 for 3 years of sorafenib. The initial starting dose of sorafenib was 400 milligrams BD, but due to difficulties keeping patients on treatment, particularly in the early stages after starting treatment, we introduced, after 13% roughly of patients had been randomized in January 2009, a lower dose introduction of 400 milligrams OD for 3 weeks. And then the patients were expected to escalate to the full dose as long as they were tolerating satisfactorily. Dose reductions were allowed, and here is a simple dose reduction schema. The full dose 400 BD. The first dose reduction was the same as the starting dose, 400 milligrams OD, and then if that couldn't be tolerated, down to 400 milligrams on alternate days or 200 milligrams daily. I think that it's worth a quick word about the Leibovitz score. This is a very simple, easily applied analysis tool to estimate risk of metastasis-free survival. And it depends on pathological T stage, regional lymph node status, tumor size, nuclear grade of the tumor, and histological tumor necrosis. And you get points for each of these risk factors. The sort of points you don't want. If you've got 0 to 2, you are low risk, and that puts you in this group, and you were not eligible for SOURCE. If you have 3, 4, or 5, you are in this intermediate risk group, and if you have 6 or more, you're in the high risk group. And you can see there is a considerable spread of risk depending on the number of points that patients have from pathological analysis of their resection specimen. This was a truly international effort. Most patients actually came from the United Kingdom because that's where we had the most centers in this study and we had the longest recruitment period. But very significant contributions were made from Australia and France, and significant contributions from a number of countries, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain included. Here are the key baseline characteristics. I think the bottom line is that these were not exceptional and were well matched. Most patients were performance status 0. There was the expected distribution of clear cell and varieties of non-clear cell tumors. And I think one point worth noting is that roughly half of patients were intermediate risk and roughly half were high risk, according to the Leibovitz score I've just shown you. In terms of the Leibovitz score characteristics, I'd just point out that a lot of patients actually had locally advanced tumours, PT3A or worse. Most patients, the large majority of patients, were either PNX or PN0, and about half of patients had histological necrosis visible in their specimens. The statistical analysis plan originally was for 1 year of treatment versus placebo. That would be arms B and C versus arm A. However, given the results of the ASSURE study and the STRAC study and other emerging data, and whilst we were still blinded to the outcomes of the source study, we decided in August 2017 to revise the primary analysis, actually to compare 3 years of sorafenib versus placebo, and thus concentrate the study on the question of whether longer exposure could be of benefit to patients. The statistical methods that were used include the Kaplan-Meier analysis, which this audience will be familiar with, and also restricted mean survival time, which uses a flexible parametric model and is particularly useful where the proportional hazards assumption is violated, i.e. the risk curves for the individual arms do not bear a constant relation to each other. So the RMST is the area under the survival distribution up to a predefined time, and for this study we used 1 decade as the predefined period. And I'm going to report RMST in years and also the associated p-value. So I gave you a tantalizing view of this a moment ago, but this is the main result of 3 years of sorafenib versus placebo. The 5-year disease-free survival for placebo was 67% versus 65% for 3 years of sorafenib. The 10-year DFS, 54% versus 53%. The hazard ratio, 1.01, which is clearly insignificant. You'll notice that actually the curves do cross over, so in the initial period, the sorafenib arm is running above the placebo arm. It crosses over between 3 and 4 years and then runs underneath the placebo arm until it comes to lie overlapping in the latter part of the curve. So the RMST is important here. The RMST for 3 years of sorafenib was 6.81, 6.82 for placebo, so a difference of 0.01, which is not significant, the p-value very nearly 1. The 1-year disease-free survival, the 1-year sorafenib versus placebo, the disease-free survival in that comparison similarly shows no significant difference. So the 5-year disease-free survival is 67% in both arms. The 10-year disease-free survival is 54% for placebo and 55% for sorafenib. Hazard ratio 0.94, which is not significant. The RMST for 1 year of sorafenib is 6.98 years, and for placebo is 6.79 years. And that gives you a difference of 0.19, which is still not significant. Here is the overall survival comparison for both the 3-year versus placebo and the 1-year versus placebo comparison, and it won't surprise you to see that these are very closely overlapping each other, and there are no significant differences here, with hazard ratios for the 3-year comparison of 1.06 and for the 1-year comparison of 0.92. And the RMST difference is a detriment of 0.06 for the 3-year comparison, which is not significant, and a benefit of 0.13 for the 1-year comparison, which is also not significant. I think it's worth noting that patients did well in this study overall, with a 10-year overall survival of around 70% in all the arms. This was a difficult treatment to deliver, both because it was a long follow-up period for patients who we hoped had been cured of their treatment. That's a generic problem for adjuvant studies, and also because of the toxicities of sorafenib in this particular group of patients. So even in the placebo arm, only just over half of patients completed the treatment as per protocol, and about half of those who did not complete the treatment stopped because of disease progression. And there was a variety of other reasons in the placebo arm. As expected then from the figures I've shown you, the 1-year sorafenib, only a third of patients completed treatment, And the reason that that is lower than the placebo arm is because of excess toxicity and patient refusal, and that was even more marked at 3 years, with only a quarter of patients completing treatment as per protocol, and a third of patients stopping for toxicity, and about 1 in 6 patients refusing continuing in the study. You'll notice that the disease progression figures appear to be lower. That's simply because this is the first reason for stopping treatment. If you've already stopped treatment because of toxicity, you can't stop for any other reason. Does not mean that the treatment is more effective. So looking at the adverse events, I think we were not surprised by which events caused problems. I think we were surprised by the severity of the event, particularly the skin events, in this particular patient population. So you have rash, hand-foot skin reaction, and alopecia, and I just point out the hand-foot skin reaction. 24% of patients getting a grade 3 toxicity in this study, and of course even grade 2 or even grade 1 toxicity actually, when experienced for long periods, can be very troublesome. And I think that this is the key reason that this treatment was so hard to tolerate in this particular patient group. I think it's also worth noting in passing that nearly half of patients developed hypertension, and 1/5 of patients in the placebo arm actually developed grade 3 hypertension. We will follow up on this in subsequent analyses. So, in conclusion, sorafenib should definitely not be used. I think it's a definitive study. It should not be used as adjuvant therapy for patients with resected renal cell carcinoma at intermediate or high risk of relapse. We have shown no DFS or overall survival benefit from longer duration of treatment than was seen in several of the other studies. And I think just as a top-line note, there are no differences in DFS or OS in high-risk patients or in the clear cell-only population. We therefore believe that active surveillance remains the global standard of care for patients in this risk group, and it is the appropriate control for current international adjuvant studies, including the MRC Adjuvant International Study, which is called Rampart. It's for the same group or same risk groups of patients, with the exception that the number of patients with intermediate risk will be capped. Patients will be randomized in this multi-arm, multi-stage design, so a bit like Stampede, where you can add and subtract arms. It's an adaptive design, very efficient from the investigator's point of view in enabling you to answer multiple questions. Arm A will be active monitoring. Arm B is durvalumab for 1 year, 1,500 milligrams every 4 weeks. Arm C is 2 doses of tremelimumab, the CTLA-4 inhibitor, and durvalumab. And Arm D is to be decided and will be added later. The study is open, about 100 patients are in, plenty of room to recruit more. Further study sites will be opening in the UK, Australia, Spain, France, and the US. If you're interested, please contact the MRC Clinical Trials Unit at this address. So this was a major undertaking over more than a decade. We're particularly grateful to the patients and their families, particularly those who actually were randomized into the study and had all that follow-up for all those many years, 1,711 such patients. To the 146 sites, 140 investigators in 7 countries. It's been one of the pleasures of my academic life actually to work with the MRC Clinical Trials Unit. It's been terrific, and I'm delighted that the infrastructure we've built up is being continued in the Rampart study. I'm very grateful to Bayer for the support of this study, particularly Brian Schwartz to Cancer UK for funding translational and other work. And to the many collaborators, I would just it's a bit invidious to call people out, but I would particularly call out Ian Davis and Martin Stockler in Australia, Laurence Albiges and Bernard Escudier in France. And finally, just one more thank you, which is to Martin Gore, my mentor, whom we tragically lost earlier this year, who, to use one of his favorite phrases, was shouting encouragement from the sidelines. Thank you very much.